It is my pleasure to welcome all the participants. Thank you very much for coming, so many of you. I would also like to welcome those watching our live stream. My name is Róbert László, an election expert. It was supposed that another person would open this conference, but in the meantime he received a stipendium in Bologna. So please do not misunderstand his absence here. One day after the elections he left for Bologna. In a month he will be back and will get in touch with you. So it will be my task to give an introductory speech. After introductory speech, there will be two panels with our experts. So once again, thank you very much for accepting our invitation, and also I would like to thank you sharing your thoughts with us. In majority of cases, such a conference is organized a couple of days after elections or a couple of weeks after the elections. The title this conference is Following the Footsteps of the Opposition. The reason for this is that this is a title that is a very comprehensive expression. In the case if the outcome of the elections would have been different, then probably we would talk about different issues right now, or probably we would talk about possibility to outline a new constitution, what kind of a government is going to be formed. If there had been a little bit close outcome between the opposition and Fidesz, then probably we would also discuss other matters than we are going to discuss today. Today we will have to talk about a 2/3 majority for the first time of Fidesz. I have this has been very surprising, shocking. I have not seen anyone who would give such a forecast and would think that such an outcome was possible. Gergely Gulyás 4 years ago accepted our invitation to such a conference. This time on Sunday evening he told us that they were expecting a positive outcome from their point of view, but he also said he wouldn't expect 2/3 majority once again. So I think we can take that to note, and this seems to be quite for sure that they were not hoping such an outcome. It is very difficult to analyze current situation. We don't really see what the future developments will be. Today we would like to talk about oppositional voters and about those who were missing at the polls this time. We will be talking about hypotheses, but analyzing for such a short time after the elections, we will have to see how we explain the fact that so many oppositional voters disappeared when casting their votes. First of all, before to discuss that, I have to say that I received a great number of questions from journalists. How many votes are still not yet counted? And I think that it was surprising even for me how many votes were not counted. 97.2% of all the votes was published on public media. Those who do not vote on their own poll rooms have not yet been summarized. So how many votes are still missing from the final result? First of all, let us see the mail votes. This has already been started to be calculated, counted, but I received an information that the counting will end tomorrow or the day after tomorrow. For the time being, 140,000 mail votes have been counted. Altogether, we will have roughly about 300,000 mail votes, 310,000. So votes sent abroad personally have not yet arrived to the election office. It is expected to arrive today. Realistically, we will see that voting personally abroad altogether will result in 170,000 votes. And then we also have to take into account those who did not vote at regular residence. Usually those who do not stay at their homes when voting election day comes, then others will have about 88% to decide finally to vote. So this is what happens to those who re-register themselves in other poll offices. There are 106 individual constituencies. 1/4 of that has not yet been counted. So this is why it is very difficult to count how many individual constituencies, how many voters from the own districts have, and how many re-registered themselves to the given district. The whole system seems to be relatively acceptable as far as vote counting is concerned. So altogether, summarizing the missing number of votes would mean between 250,000 to 300,000. So this is what is also missing from a party list point of view. We don't exactly know about 10% of all the votes, what and where those votes will be counted. I think, according to my own calculations, Fidesz might have again 3.7 million. Around 3 million votes, 3.1, 3.2. I'm talking about party list votes. And the same is true for individual votes. Usually Fidesz has much weaker results, but this time they have been performing quite well. Concerning mandates, it means that the number of Fidesz mandates, which amounts to 135 currently, will increase, and maybe this is shocking. It might amount to 137, 138. accidental votes will also play an important role. And if Christoph Szatmári will also exercise his mandate, then that will also make a difference. So it is almost for sure that 131 mandates of Fidesz will increase by 1 to 3. First of all, we will discuss Jobbik voters, because having a first glance on all the votes, we see that roughly about 1.8 million people voted on the oppositional list. If we put together MSP, LMP, DK, and all oppositional parties except for Jobbik, then we will have about 1.8 million. We also checked it, analyzed it at a county level. You see a county level distribution of oppositional votes. The brown column indicates the outcome of oppositional votes from 2018, and Jobbik results can be shown on the top of all those columns, and it shows that the missing Jobbik votes define this situation. But of course, such slide could be illustrated in a different way as well, putting together votes of other opposition parties. So this slide just by itself is not an evidence for the fact that Jobbik votes are missing. I think that this amount of oppositional votes and distribution of oppositional votes will also be corrected by counting oppositional votes casted abroad personally. So there is a hypothesis that Jobbik voters decided not to vote on united oppositional parties. So from this point of view, we have to analyze a little bit more complicated matter. In 2018, total oppositional votes had weight of Jobbik voters, which is indicated on the horizontal line. Budapest had the lowest number of Jobbik voters. It means that watching the six-party list, how big Jobbik weight was. This is illustrated on the horizontal line. And if we go to countryside, then we see an increasing role of Jobbik. Mobilization is another matter that we can also see on this slide. And that is a comparison with the mobilization in 2022. Mobilization was the best in Budapest. When we go outside towards counties, then we see that mobilization was less and less. By the increasing proportion of Jobbik weight, the weak oppositional total votes we have. So if you see this slide, then it comes clear that the stronger Jobbik's weight is the lower mobilization was this year. We analyzed that concerning other parties as well, and in all the cases, such a correlation was positive in case of all oppositional parties except for Jobbik. MSP, for example, had plus 0.8% as far as mobilization is concerned. So Jobbik has a negative correlation only. All other parties have a positive correlation. So this clearly shows that it was an illusion to think that the majority of Jobbik voters will be happy to vote on this united oppositional party list. We have always been warning the united opposition that it was impossible automatically to add up Jobbik voters to the oppositional party list. But still, the opposition was hesitant to take this reality into account. Even if we think that current Jobbik was different from what Jobbik was in the past, but the opposition did not think that majority of Jobbik voters would not be ready to vote on the united opposition. Because in the past we had the experience that the better chances a party has, the more voters it will attract. This was also what we saw in 2018. So all those facts indicate that in 2022 the opposition hoped that it would be not very difficult to push all opposition voters under the same umbrella. But it seems that this hope has not been a reality. Now coming back to this slide, we see that in 2018 we have actual data on concerning 2022. We have rough figures which can differ by 100,000 votes. But anyway, Fidesz will have about 2.9 million if we do not take into account mail votes to this. MSP, Párbeszéd, DK, and Jobbik party list was put together on the first line, and that was compared to 2022. So without the Jobbik opposition, I would have had 1.6 million in 2018, and this is compared to what the opposition might rely on as total votes in 2022. Jobbik had 1.1 in 2018, and no one must forget about the kétfarkú kutya párt, which was 100,000 in 4 years ago and 200,000 this year. Those are rounded up figures, so not very accurate figures, but anyway, these figures express something about where Jobbik voters disappeared. It is quite probable that 350,000 voted on Mi Hazánk and about 200,000 voting on Fidesz, which is about 50%, almost exactly 50% of all Jobbik voters from 2018. Roughly about 300,000 voters voted, more people voted on oppositional party list than 4 years ago. We should add to this here kétfarkú kutyapárt voters, which has a very significant increase. So it seems that roughly about 450,000 Jobbik voters were ready to vote on the united oppositional election list. Anyway, based on those figures, I have a hypothesis that a smaller part of Jobbik voters were ready to vote on the oppositional list. Which at the same time also shows that altogether Jobbik has about 6 to 7% of all the voters in Hungary today. And now coming back, why it has not been possible to see in advance.
A lot of things have misled us. Of course, I'm not blaming the research of Zavets. Let me revoke a couple of them. In November 2020, they measured the willingness of opposition of Jobbik voters to vote for the joint list. In 2020, November, around the date of the amendment of the law, was it decided to make up one common list. These are the figures. At the end, you see the Jobbik, only 81% said that they would vote for the joint list, which is not the real figure. And we tended to think that we have now the opposition voter come to the world. That's how they put it those days. And now we see that this was not true. The ones dissatisfied with the Orbán government make up a very heterogeneous group. The ones committed for the list in April 21 made up 97% of the opposition voters. The results should warn us to start a new joint thinking. Something needs to be done in a different manner. And this joint approach, development of joint considerations, is the starting point for us to invite the guests here. And here I'm asking them to come to the podium, if it is a podium. And while they're arriving, let me add one more thing. At the amendment of the law in 2020, many of us didn't understand why. The official explanation was to oppress the fake party phenomenon, but in reality this was the basis for the party of Gattyán to emerge. Of course, this was not the real explanation in my view. Now that we went through the figures, we also had a suspicion that those who only saw the research, these studies, we have had no knowledge of the Fidesz in-depth surveys. Probably they had already known that there will be much less who would join for a common list. And in November 2020, the parties already agreed to make up one common list. And most probably, and that's a hypothesis, Fidesz didn't want to risk Jobbik change its mind and launch a separate list. With the coordination, that would have been a greater danger for Fidesz. And if so, if this was the motivation behind the amendment in 2020, and if they already had the figures supporting that approach, then we have a totally different story. Let me take my seat. I hope you can hear me. I welcome our guests. Thank you very much for having come. It's basically a tradition to have Unger and Zoltán Lakner be with us. Unger from ELTE, researcher, Lakner Zoltán, chief editor of Jelen, and Ceglédi Zoltán, also political analyst. There are many other titles, but I save that. The first question: do you think we're on the right track with our explanations? Do you think this is an explanation that is the explanation? Of course, there may be much deeper causes. Let us first take that part. Do you think it is real that what is missing is the majority of the Jobbik voter? May I also greet you? Look, in the EP elections 2019, I wrote that this is going to be our last broad public opinion poll. That was the last case when the researchers met or were confronted with the main will of the voters. The list is the option when you can express your preferences for parties, and MSP Párbeszéd was the only one those days that made up a common list with a great success. Jobbik had 6.3% at those elections, and now we had 3 years of blind fly where different organizations, research institutes, you may know or you may not, make surveys. And now a story was made up. Jakab Péter is very active with a moderate media coverage, but there was no real feedback on that. We didn't really see the growth of Jobbik. So you speak about the 6.5% Jobbik, but it's not sure at all that Jobbik that got this push at the EP elections, it is not sure that they had lost their voters with this election. And it's not sure at all that the common list would have convinced the voters who, through their genesis, were against Orbán and against Gyurcsány. These voters, in my view, left the common list. And indeed, I support that this may be one of the main explanations why Fidesz could win. Let me start by thanking for the invitation again. I do agree, and I'm not repeating it. May I simply add? The example from 2019 is good because already Jobbik failed, so they were already in a downhill route compared to 2018. The lessons we should draw now is that the main task for the opposition is not to develop the next strategy, election strategy, and I'm shocked to see that they start to talk about that. Of course, we may talk about the system as such, what is the value of the elections. We should not make up the maths part now. Some have already said it before that it is not this 1.8 million voters that would have to be distributed. We should forget about the maths. We should forget about the superfluous spendings on misleading surveys. We talk about the money these parties gain from taxes. And I don't think that we should stick to an election that is not equal, not fair. Where Jobbik disappeared, well, partly with Mi Hazánk, partly with Fidesz, as you say. I think the main lesson is, at least for me, at least we should give up telling the voters of parties, you're for that party, but you should vote here too, and you should not really candidate because your party would not be a winner here. So I think this is something we should give up. I'm sure you have the right impression of where Jobbik went to. But let's forget about things. What if Kutyapárt was there? Okay, that's plus minus 200,000. Why do you say minus? If Kutyapárt had joined the common opposition list, then this plus 200,000 would not have increased the opposition voters to 2 million, but would be less on the, against the Fidesz. And Kutyapárt managed to double its results from 4 years ago. And I think with a small organization like that is a major achievement. There are very few achievements in this election, and this is one of them. Of course, you can start to find where your big voters went to, but it's very difficult. As you said, with the Zavets survey, we believed it, but we cannot control it now. This is not the four-way. May I also greet you and thank for the opportunity to be invited for the explanation of the fourth two-third victory of Fidesz.
My opinion is the following.
Yeah. When we talk about the territorial distribution of the water, does the opposition know of the voters in the countryside, or they are not aware of where to go in the countryside? I think indeed this is a question. Voters in the countryside is better now than 4 years ago, but not enough yet. It would be interesting to say where the voters in the Budapest panel districts would vote for. The illusion of Jobbik started after the elections, election day of 2018. They were about to win the elections alone. That was their strategy. And Vona Gábor said to overrun the People's Party and Jobbik by itself, but they were defeated. Jobbik, however, started to disappear after the election day of 2018. The second day after the election, half of Jobbik disappeared. This willingness to vote to other parties of Jobbik, you said it's around 80–81%. It's not impossible, and we may also talk about that, but this time I think we had structural problems. We had situational impacts. Maybe former 81 dropped down to 40 and then went up to 53 and then to even less. This will be very... How do you calculate that? Do you think that the ones who used to vote for Jobbik before vote now to other parties? Yes, but you don't know the percentages. I don't know how often and by whom this was measured. I don't know about many such data. It may well be that Fidesz had deeper surveys and have a better insight into that. To be frank, maybe this will be the expression I'll use most today, I don't know, because we should be cautious with those who afterwards explain what they had said before. Now the fact that we're here, may I recall a memory of mine from a neighboring auditorium. Karl Smuder was a guest here who, on the invitation of Political Capital, was very enthusiastic in talking about the simplicity. Of course, I'm not criticizing him, but I'm just explaining the story. He said that the only possible opposition strategy would be a total cooperation, and the opposition would have to, or the left liberal parties would have to swallow their feelings for Jobbik. but still make up a common list with them. I'm saying that as an experienced commentator on opposition defeats. 8 years ago, when there was a partial cooperation, and 4 years ago, indeed, also politicians from both sides mix up names very often. Of course, we looked at different versions of explanation. I think this time the opposition simply tried a third version, a total common list. And the municipal elections, the way we know, ended up with the total votes of the opposition voters. Maybe the situation is different. Maybe somebody locally known is more attractive to local voters than at national elections. I don't know that. But what I know is that if these calculations are right, we've just seen, then on the one hand we have the fact that part of the Jobbik voters was not willing to accept the turn led by Vona Gábor. And second, we're not willing to cooperate with the left liberal opposition, while parties in the left liberal opposition were not capable of increasing their support. I think this was a very polite formulation. And these two factors are very serious. We've also seen surveys and analysis that Fidesz, the intrusion of Fidesz in the small villages and its mobilization capacity has not been reduced or stopped. On the contrary, it increased, and their power increased as well. And the growth capability of Fidesz and the stagnation of the opposition is the mixture. And may I emphasize it again, there were many situations that had an impact and had contributed to this dramatic outcome. I was one of the more pessimists. I said that Fidesz would win around 120 mandates when we talked about it with our friends, but to have 18, 19 percentage point differences, well, I've never seen that before. And this is also due to what happened in the past weeks. Let me add to who knew what. In the past 1.5 years, the opposition parties were very often kicking each other, and this had different reasons. Let me pose a question. What is the reason for Péter Jakab publishing a very militant video on a petition against mandatory vaccination? And what is the reason that 2 or 3 weeks later all politicians of the opposition parties demanded to abolish all limitations introduced for the corona crisis? Márki-Zay Péter also explained that we would be against the mandatory vaccination. Why? What is the reason? Had they realized that the former Jobbik voters could be won by that? I was with Brenner Koloman. I was invited by Koloman Brenner in Sopron. He was the candidate those days. And in the first row, a lady stood up in the Q&A session and said that the Roma man next to her is her husband. And this man is the only reason for her not voting to Mi Hazánk. This was mid-February. This person will lose his work because he's not vaccinated, because he works in a school but it's not a problem because at least somebody will be at home to care for the children who are constantly sent home. I'm asking from here, Coleman Bennett, to stop the media because day by day, through their communication and along only this issue, they are losing voters day by day. The fact that Mi Hazánk attracted Jobbik voters, and that's the basis of their growth, is the consequences of the corona crisis. You may deny that, but that's what Mi Hazánk did. And of course you may deny, as I said, but the fact that in the last 2 months the opposition was in panic to jump on that train and say that it is Orbán Viktor who wants the mandatory vaccination. So this also showed that they secluded themselves from the overall community.
We have to do something about that. That was not the only reason for strengthening of Mi Hazánk. I was just saying that the message on vaccination was absolutely clear to everyone. Deputy Minister was arrested around this issue. That was much earlier. Anyway, as far as casting votes, Mi Hazánk has become much stronger. Regardless how we call this party, it is for sure that Jobbik still has, despite of that, we see that Jobbik still has about 5 to 6%, but they have to select relevant topics like Mi Hazánk did. I think that Mi Hazánk understood the importance of mandatory vaccination issue much earlier than opposition parties did. These far-right parties usually get to parliament if they have very strong messages to far-right voters. Jobbik managed to become strong when they decided to focus not on a very narrow number of real far-right voters. Lajos Rig, for example, this year, once again, this time lost his elections, and the previous past Nazi features of Lajos Rig was not possible to prove. So actually the problem is that there are no active voters today who would like to see real left-wing politicians in Parliament. They decide to vote on specific parties. People decide to vote on specific parties if they see some very relevant for them messages. A very important message of Mi Hazánk party was to have policemen in all settlements, even in the smallest one. They use necessity of policemen from racist point of view. Well, let us close this topic. I would like now to talk about propaganda. I'm not going to talk about that very long, but someone said that a couple of weeks ago there was analyst saying that anything people would believe if it is repeated for many times and strongly. So we see what the government and national media organization covering more than 90% of all public media in Hungary, and that which is called Kashma, and Kashma spread continuously and false information to the voters, but majority of the voters didn't have an approach and access to other messages. So what do you think about this type of propaganda? And information which is not controlled by Fidesz cannot be penetrated in the country. I would say, I would like to add to this in the brackets that America gets crazy as well, but probably the measures are different. Everyone is lying in America as well, but probably such messages that are penetrated by Fidesz in Hungary would not be possible to imagine in America. For example, that the left-wing parties burned many mail votes and so on. I was recently in the States, so I can't really say much positive opinions on America, but I think that any kind of a message can be believed if messages are repeated sufficiently enough. 23% in America think that the Bible was written by God personally, and the Bible was handed over to people personally by God. So if 23% of the population believes in that, then any kind of a message can be believed. And people in America say that it is very good that people have weapons at homes because then those weapons can be used nearby the Mexican border. So I don't think that American voters or population is any better than Hungarian people, but I think that what's even more, I would say that they are in a more difficult situation because there are 340 million weapons in homes in America. Coming back to the issue of propaganda, this is something that is something new, so it is very difficult to know much about this. We, of course, can read literature on this topic. We can see what in other countries happen, but propaganda in such a form is very new. It is very difficult to defeat propaganda. Probably it is possible to act against. We should also talk about the referendum that took place in addition to elections. People who do not agree with the Fidesz formulation of questions on this referendum was not successful for Fidesz. People did not really believe what the referendum was about. I live in the countryside, so I can't really say anything about capital city, but probably it is not a mistake. But what I see in Budapest, that in smaller cities, for example, like in Bicske, there were more billboards about the referendum than about the election. So a referendum was also very much in the center of the propaganda. But still, referendum was not successful for Fidesz, so probably it's worth analyzing what the reasons of that failure was. TÖF is an organization that everyone is laughing at, but maybe 4 years later, Fidesz will come out with another organization. But anyway, TÖF is theoretically a civic organization, but no one believes in that. They live in their own bubble, financed by Fidesz, the Lomnici, László Csizmadi are acting there, and they feel fine between themselves. So that is not very important to analyze. Probably it would be more important to analyze what those strategies and tactics are by which it would have been possible to act against propaganda. Because if we just say that Fidesz voters are stupid, crazy, the disguised racism concerning Roma people is also not very successful. Something because Roma people, whenever it comes to them feel segregation, exclusion only. So that is also very important to think about. In Hungary, opposition will not be able financially to act against propaganda. Facebook, TikTok, I don't exactly know up to what extent opposition is active on those channels. I think the only way to act or to counterbalance governmental Fidesz propaganda is a personal propaganda, personal meetings. Fidesz propaganda is extremely strong. We can discuss what was done not properly by the opposition, but one must not forget that the whole election was very unfair, which is not underlined properly. Let me go back to 2018 when in 2010, when election law was changed. I thought that the opposition would decide not to take part in the elections. Gátyán party obviously was created by Fidesz. So if the opposition started 2 years ago to threaten Fidesz by a boycott, then probably the situation would have been different. The party list entry level was changed. The opposition was unable to stand for democratic fundamental principles, and they accepted such a change of the election law. I think that is much more catastrophic than inability to act against the propaganda. We see how propaganda on Putin is performing in Hungary. We can have a look also at France, at Macron. What technology is used by other countries, for example, in Serbia, in Russia. I don't know how to stop propaganda, how to fight against propaganda. It is very difficult to reach results in America as well. There will be analyses on that. We will see how the media market will be formed in the future. I'm sorry for being a little bit hectic. Zoli was writing something about that, and this is what I think is important to accept, that currently we are in an I don't know situation. Obviously, 2 or 3 days after the election, it is very difficult to know what the future solution for opposition would be. But anyway, I think many thoughts have been mentioned here that probably you would like to react on. Gatyan Party and the participation limit is also an issue that we would have to analyze because if physically it would have been is possible to steal the money for quasi parties, then we would have much less quasi parties. Gatyan Kamu Party had not reason, not a financial reason to be formed. They had much different reason, probably a political one. So I am not really very glad that how to stop quasi parties participation. We still have much less. Quite a high number of voters, around 4 million, even more than that. But concerning the referendum, majority of voters voted in an illegible way. I think, anyway, the referendum was a success from opposition point of view because they started once again a national consultation on this issue, which Fidesz was unable to win. So it is a great achievement that Fidesz cannot say this time that they can do whatever they want to because they have the support of majority of population, which is not true in this case, and that has been quite clearly shown. So fortunately, for God's sake, at least this referendum was a failure for Fidesz. Anyway, we still have the so-called fundamental law. We still have the law on how sexual education cannot be done at schools. So it is quite possible to compare Hungarian legislation on that with the legislation in Texas or in Florida. But anyway, at least this referendum was not won by Fidesz. But anyway, Fidesz can do whatever they want to because not the UN, not the European Union, no one can stop, no one is capable to stop Fidesz except for the Hungarian population. Well, I can only react on my own sentences. I would like to mention three things. Speaking about referendum, and I am happy Anna was talking about that also as a participant of the LMBT. I am glad to speak about this referendum also as a participant of the LMBTQ lobby. I think this referendum was useful because, sort of useful because this was a topic that parties did not really want to declare their opinions because that is a very delicate issue. And last year, except for Jobbik, opposition parties did not vote on the homophobia act. But I would like once in the future to go deeper into that topic, how opposition parties behaved themselves when Parliament passed this homophobia law. Actually, Kutyapárt created a very good campaign against this referendum. I know that winning the referendum is has much less significance than the parliamentary elections. But anyway, if we take into account 1.6 million people not voting on the questions of this referendum, was a real success. And an excellent professional campaign was built around this topic. So that also means that if a concentrated usage of all limited sources is exercised, then success can be achieved. I do agree with myself, of course. Propaganda, from a certain point of view, is kind of a situation, a given, an existing situation, and if it is so, then an opposition having very limited sources, very limited channels for communication should use those channels of communication in a very operational, active way. It is not possible to spend time on Wednesday by the Prime Minister candidate, what he misexpressed on Tuesday. So it is a waste of time, a waste of sources, which is not allowed. I was also mentioning, coming back to referendum, this is a minor issue again, but propaganda is impossible to stop. And if it is so, then we have to think about 300,000 voters of Mi Hazánk and 100,000 voters of Kutyapárt. From Mi Hazánk point of view, I think it is a negative result. Anyway, this is a new party taking participation in elections for the first time.
And in that case, the 2019 municipal elections could not have happened either. So the quality of politics with the means available is still important. It may well be that Anna was right, who 4 years ago wrote that this is an election autocracy and everything is just a scenario, everything is distorted, and now all this distorted information reached the mass, through which it's just a fake illusion that elections would mean here democratic competitions. Still, it is important which way we are going, and there's a third thing, now I mentioned it, namely the results of the municipal elections. Of course, we speak a lot about the association of three cities. What is it? What is it? Yes, there was a possibility here when the opposition parties could have created power centers. I'm not encouraging anyone to make it up a party campaign of a public funding, but what I say that the position acquired can be used to radiate and have an impact outside the large towns as well. With colleagues talking about these issues, I have often quoted that already. What I want to say by that is that there was a public discourse on that, and maybe, and I'm repeating myself, and I don't want to pretend that I'm somebody who's never understood, but we already talked about these 4 and 5 years ago, and again we said that we have now better conditions to be more successful, and still we couldn't be more successful. I know that there are major differences in the resources. I edit a newspaper, so I know that. I know what it means to survive day by day. But it's not true that the opposition has zero resources. Why don't opposition parties have a common pool of experts?
Ne úgy keletkezzen mondjuk egy ellenzék program, ahogy ez a mostani ellenzék.
So that the opposition program is made up by this think tank and not in the way they're using it. I know they keep on deferring the presentation of the program, and I know that people would never read party programs, but if we have a program, we can make up one single sentence, we can consequently communicate, and I really feel a little bit ashamed that I keep on repeating that again and again, and unfortunately, we could not find an instant solution against or with the propaganda. What I know is that every missed opportunity means less opportunities tomorrow. And that's the drama of last Sunday's elections. Now, this door was slammed so badly that we will have great difficulties to wake up, while it could have been left a little bit open. Let me try a bit more optimistic. Indeed, it's not zero resources. Karácsony Gergely spent $500 million on the pre-election campaign. So if needed, they will find the funds for the opposition as well. Of course, that was the worst investment of the world, although he could have had that result as well. Propaganda is never profitable. Just look at László Seres. Profit as such is impossible in a situation where you're told what to write. An artist friend of mine told me when he's told to copy something and which way draw the line, he will never be able to do that. To pay for propaganda has minimum results because there's a very predictable content, repetitive, and this will never be paid for. So whatever is today as a propaganda is from is paid from somewhere else, not from the market. The other side of the same issue is that we could find those who pay for quality. This is Varga, Kesma president, who said that, not me, István Varga. And good writers can be found in the opposition, good journalists. It would be extremely important to have the non-pro-government publicity should not accept the temptation, and very often we see different studies measuring the percentage of those voting for and against the government, and these research institutes will keep on getting assignments and offers for further surveys as well. What I want to say by that is that paid propaganda cannot be successful on the opposition side either. Mandiner is admittedly publishing information from both sides, and that's good news. We have to accept that propaganda is not profitable and real content reaches out for people. And the third thing is that very often are now depressed with the failing campaign of the opposition. But I'm not saying that all elements had a role in this immense failure, in this crushing defeat. There are good practices which would be worthwhile to continue. A lot of things became obvious. What is the opposition capable of? What are they successful in? The worst thing would be if they hid themselves. In the end, for example, they managed to get out of the situation of simply organizing demonstrations. They had a major presence on March the 15th, for example. This is something they could repeat next time. Not necessarily will they succeed so. We kept on laughing.
Hogy az ellenzéki logó az hogyan, miként legyen.
We talked about and we're laughing about the colors of the logo. I'm sure you're very sensitive for that and you're more empathic. But in the end, all in all, I said a well-functioning campaign at the local level. The opposition was not successful in winning the mandates, but in spite of that, they managed to make up a team and a campaign that could be successful. And I visited many candidates, and what I saw was that they learned something that was not typical before. And this is something that should be maintained. The core of my statement is that, in my view, anyone who is not pro-Fidesz does the best for issues important to him or her when they do not go into the propaganda game. And once Fidesz has announced a freedom of expression and the press, then this should be made use of. We have 10 more minutes. Let us try to put the right questions. This is not nice of a moderator to tell the invitees not to give answers but to pose the right questions. But indeed, we already agreed that there are no good answers that could contribute to better results in 4 years' time. But what are the right questions that could help get into competition with the conditions we have around? Let me start briefly. The question is, what is the alternative? Namely, the fact that you can achieve changes in Hungary saying simply by I am not Fidesz and not Orbán Viktor has failed. We need something else. Maybe we need more options, not just one. Being a liberal, the others left or social democrats, so we miss a discussion and a dialogue on the left, liberal, or other alternative of the Fidesz governance. I was fed up with making court to the disillusioned Fidesz voters. This voter doesn't exist because the voters are not disillusioned of Fidesz on the one hand, and on the other, people are fed up with compromises, saying, I know what you want, but we cannot say that, we cannot do that. No, we have here somebody who is conservative, Catholic family or father with 7 children, because he's the one who can defeat Orbán. And it was impossible, but with all that, the Jobbik voters also disappeared. So I think that's where the important questions start. You said questions and ideas or statements. Of course, it is totally useless to say that we already wrote that and said that. I think we should also discuss what politics means in elections in a democracy. One of the major tragedies of Hungarian democracy, or democracy in Hungary since 1990, basically, means that democracy is exclusively the mainstream or the self-assessed mainstream writers equal to representation. Of course, movements are okay, but in elections you have parties. Good, parties are important. Representation is important. Parliamentarism is important in democracy, but this is not democracy. And I'm not going to bore you with literature, but it is a total failure of think that opposition now for 10 years being lost in the forest, come back on a route unknown. They may come back, but then they would have to take a decision to avoid long routes. This is a system you cannot defeat with elections. That's the bad news. And also, it is clear, it's been clear for a couple of years, that the more the party in power is embedded economically and financially, the less possibility there is to exclude them through elections. So then how? Either no way, look at 1/3 of the world, how they live. No, it's impossible to replace them, or with a very strong social opposition, not with a common opposition coalition. And that was the main mistake. Opposition said, oh, what do they say? Common opposition or unified opposition? Okay. But this is not what it means. This unified opposition should have made politics 4 years long. And what did we see instead? What we saw instead was that they were playing and fooling around with election mathematics. Who candidates with whom? Where would they candidate jointly? Who would be alone and where? Of course, this may be important for their core electors. But since 2015, the political elite is talking about the pre-elections, and this hasn't solved anything. Gergely Karácsony is not mayor because they had a very successful pre-election, but because he could defeat Tarlós. László had no pre-elections, and still he managed to win. The tragedy is that in 2019, we had the door opened a little bit, and now this is banged. I'm from the countryside, I told you. And this was done in a way that Fidesz has immense resources, and we're slid back now into an even worse situation. The strategic mistake was that 2019, after the EP elections, I heard, not from you but others, that the main success was the pre-election. No! The main election was the local campaign, the local performance. Next to the referendum, there is another major achievement, and this is the local campaign and the organization of the observers and the counters, the vote counters. And I think that all those, this is a nonsense, that the opposition is not prepared for the options that occur most often. I think I would have to have the time to write 3 sentences I will say when the worst thing happens. This is not my knowledge. This is in any political school book in the US. You have to have 3 sentences for all possible scenarios. I think all these local communities will die out, and I'm extremely afraid of that, because we would we have to face an immense, a big golem. You will be agents. Of course, you've been agents for a long time. LGBTQ community will be hit even more. Minorities will be oppressed and hit even more. ELTE University, I have no doubts what would happen to us, and the whole environment will be worse, much worse. So the question is, does the opposition get prepared for an election and deal with themselves again, or would they be willing to sit down and start to make politics? Not get ready for elections, not prepare for campaign, no, start to make politics, start to find people similar, and to have the resources to that as well, because as I've heard that they will take up their mandates. And this is 8 times as much what I earn, and an MP doesn't have to work so much as other people will do, so they will have the time twice a week to meet their electors in their constituencies, and if they're not let into an official building, then they would have to go to a cafe or go to somewhere open air. Because, again, first and upmost important is the contact to the electors, to the constituencies. Don't focus on the elections, but focus on what you can do to the Hungarian society. If you feel disgusted by the Hungarian society and say, oh, I'm shocked what happened, then, okay, welcome in the real world. And if you haven't seen that before, then you should not be in politics. If you're not clear about the tragic situation, the deep poverty in Hungary, then you should stop making politics. I'm not a great supporter of the opposition, but I'm very desperate that I could say I spent the best years of my life with them, and they will take another 8 years away. And if you believe, if there's anyone who believes in a common country, then you will have to get de-illusioned. The most important question is where you live. Do you need to pay attention to those who've been leading you for 12 years in the woods and made you believe that this is going to be good again? The third, you have to get clear about the way people are used. Maybe surveys and researchers are used as well. The opposition should think what they want to do within the frame of making politics.
Zoltán Lakner. I can support all that has been said by Anna. I wanted to mention a couple of pragmatic issues, but Anna focused my attention to other matters. When speaking about pragmatic issues, I mean that we need to analyze what to do in a campaign, what to do between 2 elections, and what we have not taken into account, and what the impact of a given situation past weeks was. So it is really difficult these days, in these times, to deal with politics. But it has been mentioned. It was mentioned 8 years ago. It was mentioned 4 years ago. That election can be won based on a 4-year-long hard work. So we are after 4 elections that we managed to lose continuously. So now we have to restart. We have to define what an opposition means. Whether it is possible for the currently existing opposition to achieve better results at all. We now are shocked that Fidesz will have about 138 mandates. I don't think the situation would be different, very different, if we had 120 Fidesz mandates only. The situation would be more or less the same. It is a shame to repeat things that were mentioned many times. We talked a lot of times about how to discover people again, how to discover movements again, how to mutually understand how opposition and politics, people and politics and opposition parties can understand each other. Now we had a prime minister candidate, and yes, I know that today quite many say that Marquezai played not a very successful role, and probably if we had other prime minister candidate, then the outcome of the elections would have been different anyway. We would have the same amount of votes, 1.8 million. I am saying this because during the pre-elections of Prime Minister candidate's position, people were quite well mobilized. And I do agree with Anna. It is a real danger that there is a kind of an increasing consciousness about opposition politics, but still it is a danger how to maintain and protect those 20,000 people who decided to be electoral controllers on behalf of the opposition parties. So that was a great achievement. We have to emphasize that, and it would be very important to keep those people, 20,000 people who now visited small settlements, poor settlements. Now maybe they have much more idea about how people live in those small marginal settlements. So I think that the 20,000 volunteers working for the opposition is very important to keep. I know we are running behind our schedule, but let me add one thing to this. In this, usually in type of these systems, you can just think about what Politkovskaya wrote in her diaries. In 24, there was a presidential candidate in Russia who said that I knew that Putin would have been a better candidate, but I still would wish to take participation in elections. So anyway, now to be prepared to climb on Mount Everest is something that has to be prepared for many, many years. And I think that opposition this time had a relatively constructed campaign. There was a successful demonstration on March the 15th. But of course, Putin's friendship with Orban, many people, with regards to the friendship, Putin's friendship of Orban, many people thought that probably this good friendship is good enough to avoid war in Hungary. And there was no contra messages against that. What people around the country saw that there were tensions between party leaders. I don't think that after such an unsuccessful election, no party leader decided to step back, to revoke. So political responsibility is not undertaken by anyone. There are party leaders who are impossible to get in touch with. We continuously blamed Orban by saying that it was impossible for any journalist to get in touch with him. So this behavior, another type of behavior, should be demonstrated by opposition. Currently, this situation is very disadvantageous, also due to the fact that the longer an opposition is unsuccessful, the more difficult it will be to get out from this spiral. And I'm sorry to say, as a politologist, that no one is really interested in what politicians think in their own small, narrow groups. And I can imagine that sooner or later dancers, comedians will take participation in a party campaign. But if they are talented people, then of course we have to make use of any kind of a contribution. But of course we will have pseudo Dimitris as well. There will be pseudo parties acting as if they are parties, but I think pitching themselves as political parties. I don't know what will happen now, whether currently existing organizations will be disgrouped. Now, I would like finally to summarize all that has been said, that nothing else remains for the opposition but to get out from the bubble that they are living in. Secondly, that from a moderator's point of view, I think that a moderator really can ask participants to pose questions, because by this request they really get on very well with their commentaries. And now we are going to have a short lunch break.
Akkor folytatjuk a mai konferenciánkat.
We'll reopen our conference. I do hope you had a pleasant lunch. Now we will have digesting problems because we'll get into the details of figures and data. Thank you very much, Andrea Szabó, for accepting our invitation. Ádám Sanyó, Tactical Elections.hu, and we also thanks for arriving of Gábor Tóka. Everyone prepared a short presentation and is willing to introduce some calculations. First of all, I would like to give the floor to Andrea Szabó. Thank you very much for giving me the floor, and thank you very much for inviting here. Last time, when we were sitting here, we talked about the outcome of European parliamentary elections, and we were quite happy. I do remember that then in 2019, I think in October, we were of the opinion that a pre-election campaign should be organized by the opposition as soon as possible in order to provide sufficient enough time for the Prime Minister candidate. And actually, many people did not really agree with what I said then, because others in the panel were of the opinion that it would be sufficient enough to organize a pre-election campaign half a year before the real elections. I don't think I wish to focus on the outcome, on the results of the elections, but I would like to focus on the period before the elections in order to understand when Fidesz won the elections, and also to focus on what had happened before the elections. I will try to give you some answers to those two questions. Whether we can believe polls in Hungary would be clear if we study some data. First of all, I would like to introduce to you the results of the poll from 2018. Orange indicates the forecasts concerning Fidesz. The bluish is representing Jobbik's forecast, and the red one is that of the Hungarian Socialist Party. Companies preparing forecasts in majority of cases were said to exaggerate the possible outcome of Fidesz's results, and during the past two elections that was not an over-exaggeration, but it was underestimated what Fidesz could achieve. It is quite clear that out of 11 poll stations, Fidesz is in a minus category, and in majority of cases, Hungarian Socialist Party's support was overestimated. The same is illustrated on a very simple slide. This is what we have concerning the opposition and the Fidesz. The trend is very similar what we saw in relation to 2018. We here just see an orange and a blue. And actually all public opinion companies underestimated Fidesz And regardless what kind of public opinion poll preparing forecast making institutes overestimated the opposition. I have also brought a comparison of data, how and if to compare those data, we see that all public opinion polling institutes made the same type of a mistake. We see here the mistake, if we analyze the mistakes of them, we understand that their performance is very similar to what they performed in 2018 and in 2014. It means that the same mistakes were repeated, or up in the last moments before the elections, 1 or 2 days before that, something happens that would really change voters' opinion. So it might be true that voters decided to vote in a different way, not according to what had been forecasted by public opinion companies. So the question is whether we can read voters' behavior. Gábor has a very popular blog where Gábor tries to educate the society in order that the population understood that public opinion polls are based on statistical data, which of course might represent inbuilt mistakes as well. If we know what those mistakes are, if we correct those mistakes, then we would get much better results. So I think that at the first glance, public opinion polls did not perform very well, and we will have to analyze what the reason for that was. Actually, mistakes were added up, but that is not the full explanation, because we have a more sophisticated answer to that. The second question is when Fidesz managed to win the election. I will try to summarize this very complicated question. First, I would give the answer that Fidesz did not win in 2022, but won in 2006. And since that time, Fidesz is winning continuously. And the top result achieved by Fidesz was seen in 2010. On this timeline, we can see those who have unknown preferences, and finally all those people voted on Fidesz. Many people who said that I'm not going to take part in the elections changed his or her mind and decided finally to vote. So we have to look at this slide as a mirror. Those who are definite Fidesz voters and those who have unknown political preferences, and we add up those voters, then we have a perfect mirror. Beginning from 2010, the proportion of people, voters with unknown preferences is decreasing, while at the same time number of Fidesz's voters are increasing. So I think there is a very close correlation between people not having definite known political preferences and Fidesz voters. So This clearly shows that the support of Fidesz in 2010 defines very clearly the outcome of elections that took place later on. Those between two election periods, people sort of move towards those voters who have not known preferences, and then when election itself comes, election day, then they go back to Fidesz. Let us focus now to this last part of the slide. We see that the trend is broken at one given moment. It means that up until the autumn of 2021, there was not clear, it was not clear that people who were not willing any longer to vote on the Fidesz would increase the number of people, voters with unknown preferences. But we didn't know whether Fidesz really lost certain voters. Finally, we know that they did not. We see that even after that breaking point, the same happens, what happened before. Fidesz's voters, the number of Fidesz's voters is increasing, and people with unknown preferences is decreasing.
This success story encouraged the usual impact of Fidesz, and Fidesz voters gain ground among the uncertains. 2020 December was at the time when we had a survey with a big sample, 800, in contrast to the small sample surveys with 800 or 1,000 samples. We have to have more reliable sources. We have less surveys made, but with larger samples. In December 2020, we made a survey on the set of values of the Hungarian society, and I've chosen one graphs on the Fidesz voters. Then, in December 2020, 1.5 years ago, my calculations said that there are roughly 2.9 million voters. We have a little bit more now. 1.5 years ago, this camp, so to say, was totally intact. And the ones who were added to that came to the margins. This is a perfect onion shape voting base with a core more than 1 million people, maybe more now than in December 2020, and this is solid, perfect constellation, and it is absorbing everyone in their environment. They are what I called the ring voters. They have the ring voters have some doubts, but these two groups will then attract the marginal voters, between 700 to 1 million. These rings are the voters for the 2/3 majority. The grey sometimes leave Fidesz between two elections, but return to that when they have to vote. So my answer is that Fidesz did not win the elections in April 2020, but since 2006, the 2010 construction was the best to provide and guarantee the 2/3 majority. I have a question. The last but one slide, why you have the trends from 2006. Have you also checked the same with the opposition parties? Opposition parties contra non-party attached. Yes, I checked it, but I didn't see any correlation. There were periods when MSP in itself was strong enough, and they also had this absorbing character, and there was another one when Jobbik in itself was a strong party. That was around 2015. In the 2014-2018 mandate period, when Jobbik started to behave similarly, the difference was that they didn't have that very stable period where they would have attracted people. This cyclic impact is not so obvious with the opposition parties. Maybe I draw wrong conclusions, but there is a rather unstable, or let's put it, less committed or apolitical layer of the electors who can only be reached out to by Fidesz before the elections. And the long-term perspective to me shows that the whole elections will depend on these two circles. The ones who do not vote, either do not vote or vote for the Fidesz. The 1.5, 1.9 million mid-left voting camp is impossible and incapable of reach out to new voters. Yes, that's what this graph shows too. Of course, you could expect more sophisticated answers with more encouragement, but I can't do so at the moment. The long-term graphs shows that Fidesz has very stable roots. When Fidesz voters would depart, they would never go to the opposition voters. They remain in this unknown preference group, and they are kind of hesitating, and when there is a new possibility, they return to the original position.
Észrevétele, kritikája, kérdése, nem muszáj csak.
I don't know, Gábor, if you have any questions or remarks. Just make just one more remark exactly on this graphs. To me, the movement of the uncertain voters was the most frightening 2 or 3 weeks before the election when I saw your presentation. And then you said, if we have the same movement in 2022 as we had in 2018 and before, then Fidesz will have a very strong victory. And you were right with your projection. I can agree with that, which is a rather comfortable position. I do agree that the victory was started in 2006. Indeed, this crushing victory cannot really be explained by arguments opposition comments tried to explain. Indeed, we have to accept another narrative by Fidesz, and this was, let us forget about good elections, but they say we win because we made the political investment, building of the organization, cohesion, continuous work. Of course, you have to strip off the lies here, but indeed there is something in it. Namely, they're very efficient in the election context. And to be efficient, you need the cooperation capabilities, the cohesion, the organization background, reaction capabilities. And to achieve all that, you need time. Under democratic conditions, it is easier. And Fidesz did that construction in more democratic periods than we are going to face in the coming future. So I agree with you. Fidesz won around 2006. But I don't agree with the rest, because I think that there is a very strong internal change in the Fidesz voters, with the core moving as well. Thank you very much. Sanyó Ádám is the next to make the presentation. I think Gábor didn't know what I would speak about, and indeed this is exactly the geographic transformation you mentioned in your last sentence. Okay, that's great. You can read in my mind. Okay, so what I would like to talk about is basically I want to shed a light on the failure of the narrative by which the opposition votes can be added up. Perhaps not failing is the best word for that, but it's true that Jobbik voters do not wish to cooperate so strongly with other party voters. So the history behind is that Fidesz had the redrafting of the new constituency borders on the basis of the concept to become a central power. 43.5% support and 96 individual mandates out of the 106 went to Fidesz those days. If you add up the list votes of the opposition parties, in the northeast part, opposition had a brutal majority. Jobbik and former MSP, I don't know what name they had, they together had roughly 60 plus support, and Fidesz had only between 38, 39, 37 in that region. And only the Western European classical regions for Fidesz did Fidesz get an absolute majority in 2014, and except Budapest, they almost won everywhere. 2018 is already see a different picture, so that you can see it. Okay, so first 2014. This is 2014, 2018. And what we see with 2018 is that in the western part of Hungary got even more stronger, and in the eastern part, Nyíregyháza, Debrecen, there is a major improvement to be observed, and also the middle part of the country, Kecskemét, Bács-Kiskun County, got stronger. The majority of the opposition in northeast Hungary was also less ambiguous, less obvious. 2006, by the way, that was the main base, voting base of MSP. Borsod, Szabolcs were the areas where they regularly had won 50–60%. These voters were lost by MSP in 2009. First, they went over to Jobbik, and then clearly they migrated further to Fidesz and to Mi Hazánk. For the individual constituencies, Fidesz was more important in that respect. I have a project of this calculation, and we wanted to encourage opposition voters how to maximize their votes. We almost managed to avoid 2/3 in two critical constituencies, all depended on 230 votes. One of 5 opposition voters voted very tactically to MSZP-DK candidates. Of course, the person of the candidate was also important, but that was the starting point. And then I decided in 2020 to make up a common opposition, an estimate on the common opposition, together with the Vox Populi estimates on support and votes. And I also used another broad survey ordered by László and some other constituency surveys. The trends between 2014 and 18, the fact that Fidesz got stronger is going to be continued, and this is the end result. The constituency model indeed works if we have the surveys, the broad surveys, and if you have already figures on the support of the bloc parties and the constituency surveys, then we can predict, with a couple of exceptions, the share of votes among the candidates. And candidates, because I would like to repeat that the person of the candidate himself or herself has an impact on the outcome. The main lesson here is that in Budapest, Fidesz lost power, so Fidesz had become very weak. You have a big dark blue for the second district, which means that the opposition had a very strong victory. A victory that shows that indeed there are disillusioned Fidesz voters, but they live in the 12th and the 2nd district and nowhere else, basically. So we talk about a couple of thousands of voters only. And another conclusion is that the difference among the cities has disappeared. Debrecen, Szombathely, Győr had better opposition results, in spite of the fact that they were defeated by 10 or 20%. This percentage was much less than predicted, Veszprém as well. So what we see is that this constituency modeling does work and can be reliable. And it is also clear that Fidesz at certain spots has reached the peak of its support. And I think here of Budapest and cities with county rights. 2 percentage points stronger got Fidesz in Budapest. Nationwide it was 10 percentage points, and in the large towns it was 7 percentage points. The so-called village districts increased the support of Fidesz by 15%. So the opposition does have problems, but I don't think that they would need to start with the countryside, but with the cities with their new activities. This is the results in Budapest. 4 districts. So the model was mistaken in 4 Buda districts, which, due to the migrating Fidesz voters, opposition could win. And the last not yet counted district is the election district 13. So 13 in. So according to my model, Budapest would have won with 13 districts and 2 in Szeged and Pécs. The kétfarkú kutya could win, and we basically have countries split into. If Budapest had a separate parliament, the opposition would have a 2/3 majority, and in the rest of the country they would have a 3/4 majority.
Engedett, hogy kérdezzek valamit?
Do you allow me a question? When after the municipal elections in 2019, everybody was happy that the opposition won in large towns in the countryside. And many presumed that this victory will have an impact on the parliamentary elections. And your model and your calculations can predict that impact. This is a hypothetical question. Do you think that the 2019 municipal elections and the opposition victory, did you think on the basis of the model that this victory will have an impact on the 2022 models? Yes, but I also included the uncertainty figures, but I said that there would be some impact, and the dark blue or mid blue, Szombathely, Hódmezővásárhely, Tatabánya, were exactly the cities and the areas where there was some kind of an impact of the municipal elections. And we talk about 1,000 votes, and if there is a very close game, then 1,000 votes, of course, may count. But we do see some kind of a reorganization of the powers. In Salgótarján, East Hungary, the opposition thought they could win, and it is not certain any longer. While in Debrecen and Szombathely, the candidates were so weak, that the outcome was weaker than what Fidesz had calculated with. So this is why I say that the opposition would have to focus first on the large town, because that's where they could build their bases.
So you are saying that opposition should be active, first of all, in the cities. I'm asking this because a couple of weeks ago, months ago, we were sitting together and we were not talking about cities, but about the capital city. And you then mentioned that you would have not spent a penny on Budapest during the campaign, but would have spent money on countryside cities. So what do you think? Where to look around and where to focus beginning from now?
Yes, indeed, I'm very sorry for that, but with such an advantage, nationwide advantage, I do congratulate to the three candidates who could win. The problem, in my view, is that in the countryside, and I think now of villages with less than 3,000 people, opposition would have to start from a very low base. And I'm not saying it would be superfluous, but this is a very, very long-term project. If they want to win in the next 24 municipality elections, the cities with county rights, they will have to focus on these cities. And politics is not a 4-year game, but at least 8 or 12, and this is what we have to think of. Then building the basis should start with the easiest part and not with the most difficult one. I could contradict you, but I have the role of now posing questions and not contradicting. Gábor, do you have anything to remark? I don't think that the villages you speak about have seen anyone from Fidesz. Of course, going to a village with 1,000 inhabitants is something, well, the average Hungarian lives in a small town of 13,000 people. That's why you have the 50%. Of course, the first step should be the large towns, Pécs, Szeged. Similar presences should be established in other cities. And of course, then you can go to smaller cities, Komló, Mohács, even smaller ones like Szigetvár. And you have to go then further down. That's like with networking. And then you reach the point where what you can, and you can do it with any party structure in Hungary. it's not a question. Of course, you have to start with the large ones and then go to smaller ones, but we have no time to wait. What we've seen on Sunday was, and that's self-criticism, I said the week before, what we miss for victory is this national structure, this one single opposition that moved in a coordinated manner, and the common program and everything else. But we've seen on Sunday that what we miss is somewhat more than that. It's not simply organizing people who go out to the major streets. Then we have problems of campaign intelligence, so to say, or campaign awareness. This is something the opposition will have to reconsider. Of course, there a lot of ideas come up after elections. You also had half a sentence that Fidesz has reached the top of its support. You said that for certain counties. Do they have any potential, growth potential? No, let me put it another way. Presumably, Fidesz reached the peak of its support. In the last 3 elections, if you look at their increased support, then they could not bring that increase in Budapest. They only had here an increase of 2.5%. They couldn't win any new voters. And there was another part of the map, Western Hungary. Since 2006, this part was Fidesz supporter. And they didn't manage, Fidesz didn't manage to win new voters here. Their majority is so strong that new supporters could only be won from the non-voters. They cannot attract any voters from the opposition due to the structure, the village structure. I didn't want to say anything, but I have to contradict a little bit. I think, namely, that the history that Fidesz has the strongest capability to retain voters ever since the change of the political system. And they also have capabilities to go beyond their own voting camp. You have referenda here in Hungary. You either believe that it should be taken serious or not, but there are referenda. And there were 2 initiatives by Fidesz, the one now and the other one, where they always manage to go beyond their own voters. The only question that remains here, if they try to find issues which are national in their understanding, would they be able to attract those people who will vote for Fidesz for the Fidesz idea in the referendum, even if they are not Fidesz supporters? If Fidesz manages to find issues like that, then I'm sure they will have other possibilities to increase their voting camp. But I agree with you. The only thing that happens is that they will simply try and switch former opposition people because they will not be able to find new voters from the non-voters at all. Okay, thank you very much. And then we ask the colleagues for the presentation of Gábor Tóka. I think this is the latest and newest presentation. Yes, I made it here, indeed. I had to do that in pajamas, right? Okay, I did some of my work at home. I had to do a lot of things. I didn't really have time as a result of the past weeks.
Speaking about methodology, first of all, I would like to mention that after such shocking result and dramatic from political point of view result has great attention also from abroad. But I don't think we know much more about explanations for such a result that what we had a week ago. And we will not have an opportunity to give specific explanations, researches, because Hungary is not going to be a country where researchers can make international analyses, I don't know, where the publications will be published on the election 4 years ago. We had, we think that 4 years ago it was for the last time. Anyway, Andrea has a stamina, and she promises us to have a publication on this election as well. It seems that beginning from now, many people who have a clear political attitude carry on their own scientific work, but will not be active politically in public. Now, obviously, there will be lots of brainstormings about the result of the elections. There will be lots of explanations. There will be 2 or 3 leading narratives that people will remember, that will have a deep influence on people. And it will have a future impact on future political changes on political views. But it is quite natural that this is how political procedures develop. People mainly wish to become a winner, and the winner does not have to explain why a political party won elections. So now it is a question for, or a task for the election to explain their failure, and they might, they will have to say something more, not only because it was raining, it was cold on Sunday, so that would not be an acceptable explanation. But some will try to give explanation like that. Anyway, recently, or in a couple of minutes ago, somebody mentioned that it is not time yet for in-depth explanations. Probably it is time to ask questions. After such an election, many people say that election system is repressing, that in such an election system it is impossible to win. Anyway, I do understand that some people will explain the failure with that, but I don't really think that is a satisfying explanation. Somebody wrote a tweet, serial on elections, saying that the good question is not whether in such an election system is whether it is possible to win elections, but the right question is what the government will, how will change election system, and what specific changes mean from the election result point of view. If I were an opposition, I would ask questions. What event, what to use for example, a referendum, and many other events also can be used for certain purposes. And reacting on Robert's explanation that people like to be belong to the center. Speaking about Jobbik, for example, I think that already in 2018 the number of Jobbik voters significantly dropped. Many Jobbik voters already then joined Fidesz, or later on joined Mi Hazánk party. So, but Mi Hazánk also had a movement before forming a party, so former Jobbik voters decided to join the movement first and then to join Mi Hazánk. At the same time, we have to see that beginning from 2019, in all public service, people speak very differently, as if they forget who they voted on before in the past, and public surveys from 2019 show that people simply did not decide who to vote during next elections for. But of course, we know that much more Jobbik voters decided to vote either on Fidesz or on Mi Hazánk, and very few of them decided to vote on the left liberal unity of oppositional parties. Last week, I had some presentations showing one of my presentations was performed by me for a huge amount of money. It was for the investment bank. I showed this slide there as well. And then I also had a presentation for another company for board of directors of a research institute. I showed this slide, I showed them this slide as well. They, it was quite clear they were much more optimistic than I was. At the same time, I knew that people did not say what data in reality show. So surveys showed that the opposition was as if the opposition was much stronger. But we received data showing clearly that Fidesz had definitely higher support than the unity of opposition parties. So that also shows the importance to understand how reliable data of public service are. Average rate of mistake is around 20–25%, and this is quite acceptable, even if we analyze the forecasts and the actual outcome of the elections. So the average 25% of the difference will be clearly seen on Friday when we have the specific numbers counting all the votes. So this is the slide I showed last week, and according to my forecasts, Fidesz retaining two-thirds majority had a reality of 20–24%, and then simple majority of seats amounted, according to my forecast, to more than 50%. So I am not, I can't agree, and I'm not saying that such a Fidesz victory would have not been possible to forecast, to foresee. Maybe two-thirds was not that clear. Róbert and Andrea saw me last week, and they were screaming when seeing my figures, but unfortunately then on Sunday it was possible to cry together. Anyway, the difference between forecasts and reality might also be explained by wishful thinking. Due to certain reasons, public opinion surveys did not understand something, or did not demonstrate something. I understood that the local presence of the opposition was very strong, and was really a success, because mainly that was important for people not reading the news, not reading not listening to, not watching TVs, not listening to radio, not reading various written publications. For those people, local intensive presence was very important. In such a situation, that was important, and well-known method. A book was published on this topic. Whenever a piece of news is very intensively penetrated and received by the public, then huge differences in opinions that might be created within a population not having certain definite opinion. So when speaking about how to foresee future results, we see here with those dots surveys that have been carried out for the past couple of years. The opinion changed a little bit. There were no significant changes as far as Fidesz voters are concerned. So the whole story was just about specific status of the opinion. It shows different picture in 2019 after municipal elections. They increased their popularity. The opposition, united opposition, decided to have a blue color. It took quite a time to decide on that. I was using for the opposition blue color for quite a long time, for several years. So after 2019, after parliamentary elections, after municipal elections, the opposition was very glad and was starting to believe that Fidesz would not have a two-thirds majority in 2022, though we now know that Fidesz got a little bit even more than that. During the slavery, during the demonstrations against Slavery Act, once again, there was a period of time when the opposition started to get stronger, and then in August 2020, when it was decided by the opposition to be united, once again had an increasing support, and then beginning from autumn, beginning from after the pre-election campaign, the opposition started to lose its popularity and the number of voters. This is somehow working in a different way, not according to what I would like to do. So how to foresee, how to make forecasts for future mandates? I think there are three figures that matter, the difference between two big parties, Kutyapárt and Mi Hazánk, whether they can gain mandate, and the third figure that matters is the difference between those two forecasts. Based on all those figures, whenever forecasts show that Fidesz has 8% of an advantage, then the opposition might still have a hope to win. But when the opposition has just 13% to win two-thirds, or when public service shows that the opposition has 0 chances to win two-thirds, then it at the same time will increase the probability of Fidesz to win two-thirds. So those two figures are very important, and then we also have to know something about geography. This is a slide on 2018 and on European parliamentary elections in 2019. The colored dots indicate constituencies. Red dots demonstrate Budapest. Where in the 13th district, a Socialist Party politician was very popular, and so on. And we see the distribution of 106 constituencies on the line. So in countryside, it is quite clear. Also on this slide, the situation is very different from that of Budapest. It is much more important to know the national-wide situation, and then we can deal with Budapest. This is what happened this year. The black line shows the situation if all constituencies would have had the same result. And then on the vertical line, we see the leading role of Fidesz. We see all Fidesz supporting cities. So it is absolutely useless to spend money on small settlements because the opposition has to pay attention to medium-sized or bigger cities. So this is a basic analysis. There are lots of explanations. I also have lots of speculative explanations, but of course I'm not going to demonstrate them now. Thank you very much. That was quite an exhausting contribution. I don't know, Ádám, Andy, would you like to say something? When watching data of Andrea, then it was very interesting to see the mirror. Gábor has a little bit different when having a geographical analysis, but in my slide there was no geographical distribution, geographical explanation or geographical study. So we will have to think about it and raise probably not methodological problems only. Maybe if we have research on a geographical distribution of the votes, I can't really imagine today, but it is still possible that some voters voted on the opposition despite that probably previously they had voted not on opposition parties. We have not talked about the youth. That was also an interesting question to see. I was not saying, probably you misunderstood me, I was not saying that Jobbik voted too many different parties. No, I think that the Jobbik in 2018, from 2018, was taken into consideration by surveys, though Jobbik has significantly changed. Andrea shows the results concerning the whole population, all the voters, but when I do my survey, my research, then I analyze political parties only. One more thing that I wish to mention, what to learn. Listening to the previous panel as well, I have the feeling that even those who do not really like to start a discussion on what to do now make a mistake. One of the lessons to be learned is that public opinion service must not be thrown away. Those should be used. Just like Zoltán Ceglédi mentioned as well, it is very easy to refer to surveys, public opinion researchers, when we would like to explain our choices, but whenever our choices are mistaken, then it is too easy to throw away researchers. So now, of course, it is a question how to continue an activity with in politics. We know that after 2018, there were some ideas to boycott Parliament when seeing that a two-thirds majority was won by Fidesz in, I'm talking about 2018. I was wondering whether that would have been a good solution, but it was absolutely clear, and it should have been made somehow more understandable that the opposition parties had very limited opportunities. And we also know that in 2018 there were lots of pseudo parties willing to gain money. In 2022, now the Gotyan party was not really creating a party just because to win money. They spent much more money on the campaign if to compare to the amount received by them. So regardless what the reason for them was to set up a new pseudo party, but if Gotyan party is going to win a seat in the European Parliament, then that will once again create an additional scandal. But of course, Fidesz is of an opinion that any pseudo party that is not going to exist during the next elections will mean or will result in receiving by Fidesz former voters once again. So those voters will go back to them. When I was saying that in such a system, people or voters, political parties will have to think about what to do with the currently existing election system, it is absolutely clear that under these current circumstances, it is impossible to win elections. So we have to analyze what to do under current conditions. Well, thank you very much for your presence. Thank you very much to the participants of the panel. This conference will be possible to watch on our YouTube channel and also on Facebook. Thank you very much, and see you next time again. Thank you.